There's a satisfying kind of justice that happens when a lie gets big enough to collapse under its own weight. Not a small lie, not the kind of lie that can be corrected with a footnote. The kind of lie that spreads across every major technology publication on the planet in 48 hours, generates 12,000 upvotes on Reddit, fills social media, timelines with outrage, and then unravels completely, publicly, humiliatingly, in front of the exact same audience that believed it. That is what happened to Windows 12 in March 2026. And the story of how it happened, why it happened, and what it reveals about the actual state of Microsoft's operating system is more damaging to Microsoft than any fabricated rumor could ever be. Here is what the world was told. A major technology publication, PC World, ran an article in early March stating that Windows 12, codenamed Hudson Valley Next, was expected to launch in 2026. The report claimed that the new operating system would feature deep AI integration, a modular core PC architecture, mandatory NPU hardware requirements of 40 TOPS or more, and potentially subscription-based pricing for premium AI features. The article spread instantly. Other publications picked it up. Reddit threads accumulated thousands of comments. Social media posts reached millions of people. The technology press treated it as breaking news, and the public reacted with exactly the level of fury you would expect from people who have spent 5 years watching Microsoft systematically degrade their computing experience. There was just one problem. Virtually none of it was true. Windows Central, citing sources directly familiar with Microsoft's internal roadmap, confirmed that there are no plans to ship a Windows 12 in 2026. The publication's senior editor stated plainly that the Windows roadmap for 2026 is entirely focused on fixing Windows 11 and attempting to improve its reputation. Neowin investigated and discovered that the original article was actually a mistranslation of a German language piece from PC World's sister publication, PC Welt, published without proper sourcing, without backlinks, and without any indication that it was translated content rather than original reporting. PC World's own executive editor later acknowledged the error, saying the article did not meet the publication's standards and should not have been published in its original form. But the damage was already done. And what made the damage particularly revealing was the mechanism by which the false story spread. Windows Latest traced the chain of amplification and found that multiple AI-driven websites had scraped the original article, rewritten it using automated tools, and republished the same fabricated claims as independent news. Those AI-generated rewrites then became sources for other AI-generated articles, creating what investigators described as a hallucination loop, a feedback cycle where each AI-generated repetition increased the apparent credibility of claims that had no foundation in reality. The codename Hudson Valley was real, but it dated to 2023 and referred to Windows 11 version 24H2, which had already shipped. The core PC architecture was a real internal project, but it was a 2023 initiative that had either been scrapped or absorbed into ongoing Windows 11 development. The radically redesigned interface was based on a concept from 2022 that was never approved for production. The subscription model claims were based on the existence of Windows 365, which is an enterprise cloud product, not a consumer desktop operating system. Every headline-friendly detail in the viral report was either outdated, misattributed, or entirely invented. So Windows 12 is not coming in 2026. That is the factual reality. But here is where this story becomes genuinely important. Because the most significant thing about the Windows 12 lie is not the lie itself. It is the fact that millions of people believed it instantly, without question, and with total conviction. And they believed it because every single claim in the fabricated report described something that Microsoft would absolutely do based on everything Microsoft has already done, a subscription-based operating system. Microsoft already sells Windows 365, which delivers the entire Windows desktop as a cloud stream service for a monthly fee. Mandatory AI hardware requirements. Microsoft already requires TPM 2.0 and specific processor generations for Windows 11, excluding hundreds of millions of functional computers. Deeper Copilot integration embedded into every layer of the system. Microsoft has spent 2 years doing exactly that, pushing Copilot into Notepad, Paint, Photos, the Start menu, File Explorer, and the Settings app until their own VP publicly acknowledged in March 2026 that the company needs to create a calmer operating system with fewer upsells. The fabricated Windows 12 report was instantly credible because it was indistinguishable from Microsoft's actual trajectory. And that instant credibility is the most devastating indictment of Microsoft's strategy that any analyst, any journalist, any competitor could ever produce. When your user base cannot tell the difference between a malicious fabrication and your actual business plan, you do not have a communications problem. You have a trust crisis. Now let me tell you what is actually happening with Windows while the internet argues about a product that does not exist. Microsoft's real 2026 strategy is to fix Windows 11, not replace it, not evolve it into something new. Fix it. Because Windows 11 has been, by virtually every user-facing metric, a reputational catastrophe. The February 2026 Steam hardware survey showed a 12% increase in Windows 10 users and a 10% decrease in Windows 11 users. People are not just failing to upgrade to Windows 11. Some of them are actively going back to Windows 10, despite the fact that Windows 10 reached end of support in October 2025 and is no longer receiving security patches. Think about what that means. A measurable number of users would rather run an unsupported, unpatched operating system than continue using Windows 11. That is not a statistic. That is an indictment. The list of problems Microsoft is trying to fix reads like a confession of everything they got wrong. They are bringing back the movable taskbar, a feature that existed in every version of Windows for decades before Windows 11 removed it. They are reducing Copilot integration across the operating system, pulling AI features out of applications where users never wanted them. They are promising faster File Explorer performance, lower memory usage, and fewer UI inconsistencies. They are addressing the white flash bug in File Explorer that has persisted through multiple updates. They are working on reducing the number of promotional banners and recommendations embedded throughout the operating system. Every single item on that list is a problem Microsoft created, not a problem they inherited, not a technical limitation they are working to overcome, a problem they deliberately introduced because someone in a planning meeting decided that AI engagement metrics, advertising revenue, and subscription funnels were more important than the basic stability and usability that users expect from an operating system they paid for. And while Microsoft spends 2026 cleaning up a mess of its own making, Linux is doing something remarkable. Linux is doing reality, not the reality of press releases and investor presentations, not the reality of fabricated reports and AI-generated hallucination loops. The reality of an operating system that works, that respects its users, and that is growing at a pace that should alarm everyone in Redmond who is paying attention to the data. Linux desktop market share reached 4.7% globally in 2025, a 70% increase from just 3 years earlier. The United States crossed 5% for the first time in June 2025. India reached over 16%. Steam's gaming survey reported Linux usage exceeding 3% in late 2025, the highest level in the platform's history on Linux. The global Linux operating system market is projected to grow from roughly $22 billion in 2024 to nearly $100 billion by 2032. And the trajectory, according to multiple independent analysts, points towards 6% global desktop market share by late 2026. Those numbers are accelerating, not plateauing. And the forces driving them are structural, not temporary. Governments are switching. Denmark's Ministry of Digitalization began transitioning away from Microsoft products in mid-2025, moving staff to LibreOffice and exploring Linux deployment. Their motivation was not cost savings, although that is a factor. Their motivation was digital sovereignty. Denmark's Minister of Digitalization stated publicly that the country needs control over its own data, software updates, and security infrastructure, and that depending on products from a major foreign corporation represents unacceptable risks. Copenhagen and Aarhus, Denmark's two largest cities, initiated similar transitions. Germany's Schleswig-Holstein committed to replacing Microsoft Office with LibreOffice and Windows with Linux across its entire state administration. Switzerland invested over $200 million in a national cloud service and passed legislation requiring government-developed software to be released as open source. The European Union is actively considering an EU Linux operating system for public administrations across all member states. By December 2025, Denmark's Road Traffic Authority became the first agency to pilot SIA Open, a government project aiming to move up to 15,000 government users across multiple state agencies to open source solutions. These are not experiments. These are national policy decisions made by sovereign governments that have concluded, after careful analysis, that depending on Microsoft for critical infrastructure is a strategic liability. And here is the part that connects the Windows 12 fabrication directly to the Linux reality. The reason the fake Windows 12 report spread so fast, the reason millions of people believed it without verification, is the same reason governments are abandoning Microsoft. Trust is gone, not damaged, not strained, gone. When Microsoft removed the bypass NRO command in March 2025, they told users it was to enhance security and user experience. When they eliminated every remaining local account workaround in October 2025, they said it was to ensure devices were fully configured. When users across multiple countries were blocked from downloading Windows 11 ISO files in February 2026, Microsoft said nothing at all. When Pete Batterd, the developer of Rufus, publicly accused Microsoft of paying an employee to deliberately break his download scripts, Microsoft said nothing. When mandatory updates in January 2026 caused widespread boot failures, and Microsoft had to tell users to uninstall the update, that silence expanded into something that felt less like corporate communication strategy and more like institutional contempt for the people who use their products. Each of these events individually can be explained. Collectively, they form a pattern that millions of users have internalized. Microsoft does not tell the truth about what it is doing to Windows. It says security when it means control. It says user experience when it means monetization pipeline. It says fully configured when it means linked to our advertising and telemetry infrastructure. The gap between what Microsoft says and what Microsoft does has become so wide that users now automatically assume the worst about any Microsoft announcement, and they are usually right. Linux does not have this problem, not because Linux developers are morally superior, because the structure does not allow it. The code is open. Every change is publicly visible. Every decision can be reviewed, challenged, and reversed by anyone. If a distribution tried to introduce telemetry, forced updates, mandatory accounts, or embedded advertising, the community would fork the project and create a clean version before the end of the week. This is not theoretical. It has happened before. It is the immune system that open source development provides against exactly the kind of user-hostile behavior that Microsoft has normalized. When you install Linux, nobody asks you to create an account with anyone. Nobody requires an internet connection. Nobody serves you advertisements. Nobody forces updates that break your hardware. Nobody takes screenshots of your activity for an AI to index. Nobody declares your perfectly functional computer obsolete because it lacks a specific chip. The operating system sits on your machine and does exactly what you tell it. Nothing more, nothing less. And when you sit down in front of a computer that operates on those terms, after years of using one that does not, the experience is not just different, it is liberating. And the performance gap makes it tangible even for users who do not care about philosophy or privacy. A 2018 laptop that struggles under Windows 11, choking on background processes and telemetry services and Copilot integration it never asked for, runs like a new machine with Linux Mint or Zorin OS installed. The boot is faster. The interface is snappier. Applications open instantly. The computer does not slow down over time because there are no background services silently accumulating, no registry. Entries degrading performance, no bloatware reinstalling itself after every update. The hardware did not change. The software stopped sabotaging it. Let me tell you what I think the real story is here, because it is not the story most people are focusing on. The real story is not that Windows 12 was a lie. The real story is not that Linux is growing. The real story is that we have arrived at a moment where the world's most dominant operating system is so damaged, so distrusted, and so hostile to its own users that a completely fabricated worst-case scenario was indistinguishable from its actual roadmap. And the alternative, the operating system that treats your computer like it belongs to you, is being adopted by national governments as a matter of sovereign security. That convergence, the simultaneous collapse of trust in Microsoft and the institutional legitimacy of Linux, is the most significant shift in personal computing since the smartphone revolution. And it is happening right now. Microsoft can fix bugs, they can bring back the movable taskbar, they can reduce Copilot clutter and promise fewer upsells. But they cannot fix the fundamental problem, which is that Windows no longer exists to serve users. It exists to serve Microsoft, every ad in the start menu, every mandatory account requirement, every blocked download tool, every eliminated local account workaround, every artificial hardware requirement that sends a functional computer to the landfill. All of it serves Microsoft's quarterly revenue targets, not the person sitting in front of the screen. Linux serves the person sitting in front of the screen. That is all it does. That is all it has ever done. And in 2026, for the first time in the history of personal computing, enough people are noticing that the numbers have become impossible to ignore. Bill Gates built the most successful software company in history on a promise: a computer on every desk and in every home. Linux is now the operating system that keeps that promise, the one that treats your desk and your home as yours, the one that does not report back to Redmond, the one that does not require permission from a cloud server before it lets you use your own machine. Microsoft got caught lying about Windows 12. But the deeper truth is that Microsoft has been lying about Windows for years, lying that forced accounts improve security, lying that artificial hardware requirements are engineering decisions, lying that embedded advertising is user experience, lying that Copilot integration is what users asked for. The Windows 12 fabrication was just the most visible lie in a long chain of smaller ones that have systematically eroded the trust of an entire user base. Linux does not lie. The code is open, the intentions are transparent, The results are measurable, and every day, in growing numbers, people are choosing transparency over promises and reality over marketing. The question is not whether this trend will continue. The forces driving it are structural and accelerating. The question is how long Microsoft will keep pretending it is not happening. And the question for you, right now, today, is whether you will keep waiting for Microsoft to change, or whether you will make the change yourself. Because Linux is not coming someday. Linux is here. It is mature. It is capable. It is free. And it is the only major operating system on Earth that treats your computer like it actually belongs to you. If you found this valuable, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want to stay informed about what is actually happening in the technology industry. And if you think I am wrong about any of this, tell me in the comments. I would rather be corrected than comfortable. But the data does not lie. The code does not lie. And the trajectory does not lie. Microsoft made its choice. Linux offers another one. And every day more people are taking it. And I want to go deeper into something that most coverage of this story has completely missed. Because the Windows 12 fabrication was not just a media failure. It was a diagnostic event. It told us something profoundly important about the state of the relationship between Microsoft and its users. And what it told us is that the relationship is functionally over. Let me explain what I mean by that. In a healthy relationship between a company and its customers, a fabricated report claiming the company was about to do something terrible would be met with disbelief. Users would say that does not sound right. They would push back on the claims. They would give the company the benefit of the doubt because the company had earned that doubt through years of trustworthy behavior. That is what happens when trust exists. The audience acts as a natural immune system against misinformation because their experience tells them the claim does not match reality. That is not what happened with the Windows 12 story. What happened was the exact opposite. 12,000 people upvoted the Reddit thread. Thousands of comments expressed not surprise, but resignation. The dominant reaction across every platform was not, "This cannot be real," but of course, "This is real." And when the story was debunked, a significant number of users responded not with relief, but with suspicion. They said Microsoft was probably going to do it anyway, just not this year. They said the debunking was damage control. They said it was only a matter of time. That response pattern is not the behavior of a customer base that trusts its vendor. That is the behavior of a customer base that has been conditioned, through years of lived experience, to expect the worst from the company that controls their operating system. And conditioning that deep does not reverse with a blog post promising fewer upsells. It reverses through years of consistently treating users as customers rather than products. Microsoft has shown no indication that it intends to make that transition. Now, I want to talk about what Linux is actually doing in 2026, not as a theoretical alternative, but as a practical, functioning daily use operating system that is changing how real people and real institutions interact with their computers. Because while the technology press was arguing about whether Windows 12 exists, Linux was quietly achieving milestones that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. The Steam Deck transformed Linux gaming from a niche hobby into a mainstream reality. Valve's Proton compatibility layer now supports thousands of Windows native titles with performance that frequently matches and occasionally exceeds native Windows performance. The Steam hardware survey showed Linux gaming market share exceeding 3% in late 2025. That is a 52% increase from just 1 year earlier. CachyOS and Bazite, gaming-optimized Linux distributions, are showing consistent month-over-month growth. The gaming barrier, which for 2 decades was the single most effective argument against Linux adoption, has been functionally eliminated for the majority of users. Enterprise adoption is accelerating. TechTarget published an analysis in January 2026, specifically examining why Linux desktops could see significant enterprise growth this year. Their assessment cited the end of Windows 10 support, Windows 11's restrictive hardware requirements and associated upgrade costs, the sustained growth of Linux across server and cloud environments, increasing availability of Linux first hardware from manufacturers who are now treating Linux as a first-class deployment target, and the continued expansion of SaaS and cloud-based applications that make the underlying operating system increasingly irrelevant to daily workflow. That last point is critical, and most people underestimate its significance. When your email runs in a browser, when your documents live in Google Workspace or LibreOffice, when your project management happens in a web application, when your video calls run through a browser-based platform, the operating system underneath becomes infrastructure. You do not care about infrastructure. You care about whether it works, whether it is stable, and whether it gets out of your way. Windows 11, with its mandatory accounts, forced updates, embedded advertising, and Copilot integration that nobody requested, is the opposite of infrastructure that gets out of your way. It is infrastructure that constantly demands your attention, your data, and your compliance. Linux is infrastructure that disappears. You turn on your computer. It works, you do your tasks. It does not interrupt you, you shut it down. It does not argue. That is what infrastructure is supposed to do. And the environmental dimension of this shift cannot be overstated because it connects directly to the Windows 12 fabrication in a way that most coverage has overlooked. Remember, one of the fabricated claims was that Windows 12 would require dedicated NPUs with at least 40 TOPS of processing power. That claim was false in the context of a 2026 launch, but the underlying trajectory it described is real. Microsoft has been steadily increasing the hardware requirements for its operating systems, and Copilot plus PC requirements already mandate NPU capabilities that exclude the vast majority of computers currently in use. If that trajectory continues, and every indication suggests it will, the next major version of Windows, whenever it arrives, will exclude even more machines than Windows 11 already does. The environmental cost of this artificial obsolescence is staggering, and it is not hypothetical. Canalys estimated that 240 million PCs worldwide cannot officially run Windows 11. US PIRG estimated that the end of Windows 10 support could generate over 700 million kilograms of electronic waste. The European Parliament formally questioned the European Commission about whether Microsoft's hardware requirements are compatible with the EU Circular Economy Action Plan. An international coalition of environmental organizations called on Microsoft to extend free support to prevent what they described as one of the largest waves of avoidable electronic waste in the history of consumer technology. Every single one of those 240 million machines can run Linux, not theoretically, practically. A computer from 2015 with a dual-core processor and 4 gigabytes of RAM, a machine that Windows 11 rejects outright, will run Linux Mint or Zorin OS or Ubuntu smoothly, securely, and productively. The machine is not obsolete. The software Microsoft is trying to force onto it is designed to reject it. Linux accepts it. Linux does not care what year your processor was manufactured or whether you have a TPM chip. Linux cares about one thing. Can the hardware run the software? If the answer is yes, and for virtually all of these machines the answer is yes, then the machine keeps working. Every computer that gets Linux installed instead of going to a landfill is a computer that is not generating 300 to 400 kilograms of carbon dioxide, equivalent through the manufacturing of its replacement. Multiply that across tens of millions of machines, and the environmental impact of Linux adoption becomes one of the most significant sustainability stories in the technology industry. And yet it receives a fraction of the coverage that a fabricated Windows 12 report received in a single afternoon. Now let me address the most common objection I hear whenever I discuss Linux as a genuine alternative to Windows. The argument goes like this: Linux is fine for tech enthusiasts, but regular people cannot use it. It requires command line knowledge. It is not user-friendly. Normal users will be lost. I've tested this objection personally. I've installed Linux Mint on machines used by people who have never seen a Linux desktop in their lives. People who have used Windows their entire computing lives. People who would describe themselves as not good with computers. And do you know what happened? They used it, they opened a browser, they checked their email, they wrote documents, they watched videos, they managed their files. They did everything they normally do, and they did it without needing the command line, without needing technical support, and without encountering any of the advertisements, account requirements, forced updates, or Copilot pop-ups that would have interrupted them on Windows 11. Modern Linux distributions are not the Linux of 10 years ago. They are polished, intuitive, visually appealing operating systems with software centers that make installing applications easier than it is on Windows. You do not download executable files from random websites. You open the software center, you search for what you need, you click install. The application arrives from a curated, verified repository. No bundled toolbars, no optional adware, no installation wizards trying to change your default browser. Just clean, verified software that installs in seconds and works immediately. And here is something that surprises almost everyone who tries Linux for the first time. The computer does not slow down over time. On Windows, the experience of a machine degrading over months and years of use is so universal that most people assume it is a hardware problem. It is not. It is a software problem. Background services accumulate. Registry entries pile up. Bloatware reinstalls itself after updates. Telemetry processes consume resources. The operating system becomes progressively heavier, progressively more demanding, progressively more interested in serving Microsoft's needs than yours. On Linux, the system you install on day 1 is essentially the system you have on day 300. It does not accumulate bloat. It does not reinstall software you removed. It does not add new background services without your knowledge. The machine stays fast because the operating system stays clean. Now, I want to close with something that I think captures the full meaning of the Windows 12 situation better than any technical analysis or market share statistic. Microsoft got caught in a lie about Windows 12, but the lie was not Microsoft's. The lie was fabricated by an AI-generated content loop that recycled old rumors and presented them as new facts. And yet the lie was instantly, universally, unquestioningly believed by Microsoft's own user base. Not because the users were gullible, because the lie was perfectly consistent with everything Microsoft has actually done over the past 5 years. The users did not fail a fact-checking test. They passed a pattern recognition test. They looked at the claims and compared them against Microsoft's documented behavior, and the claims matched. That is the Windows 12 situation in its purest form. The operating system itself does not exist, but the fear of what it will become is so perfectly calibrated to reality that fiction and strategy are indistinguishable. Microsoft has spent 5 years building a track record that makes every worst-case scenario about its products instantly plausible. And now they are spending 2026 trying to fix the damage, promising a calmer operating system, fewer upsells, movable taskbars, and reduced AI clutter. Promising, in other words, to undo the things they deliberately chose to do. Meanwhile, Linux does not need to promise anything. It does not need to announce a calmer experience because it never stopped being calm. It does not need to reduce upsells because it never had any. It does not need to bring back features it removed because it never removed them in the first place. It does not need to rebuild trust because it never broke it. Linux just works quietly. Honestly, on your terms, on your hardware, under your control. Bill Gates built a software empire on the idea that computers should serve people. That idea was beautiful, and it changed the world. But the company he built abandoned that idea when it discovered that serving people was less profitable than monetizing them. The computers are still on the desks, but they no longer serve the people sitting in front of them. They serve a corporation in Redmond that decided your autonomy is less important than their quarterly revenue. Linux never made that decision. Linux cannot make that decision. The structure will not allow it. And that structural guarantee, that permanent architectural commitment to serving the user, and only the user, is worth more than any feature announcement, any performance benchmark, and any promise from a company that has broken every promise it has ever made about respecting your control over your own computer. Microsoft got caught in someone else's lie about Windows 12. But the reason that lie worked is because Microsoft spent 5 years telling lies of its own. Lies about security that were really about control. Lies about user experience that were really about monetization. Lies about hardware requirements that were really about forced obsolescence. The Windows 12 fabrication was just the most public, most visible, most embarrassing proof that when it comes to Microsoft, nobody believes the official story anymore. Linux does not have an official story. Linux has source code, and source code does not lie. If you found this valuable, share it with someone who deserves to know what is actually happening. Subscribe if you want the truth about the technology industry. Not the press releases, not the marketing, not the AI-generated hallucinations, but the reality of what these companies are doing to the computers you paid for and the choices you still have. And if you disagree with anything I have said, tell me. I would rather be challenged than comfortable, because the data is clear, the code is open, the trajectory is undeniable, and the only question that remains is whether you will keep waiting for Microsoft to earn back your trust, or whether you will give it to the operating system that never lost it in the first place. And one more thing before you go, because I think this detail matters more than people realize. When the Windows 12 fabrication was circulating, when Reddit threads were filling with thousands of angry comments and social media was on fire with outrage, do you know what Microsoft did? Nothing. They said nothing. They issued no statement. They posted no clarification. They let the fabricated story burn through their entire user base for days before third-party journalists, independent reporters, and community fact-checkers did the work of debunking it. Microsoft, a trillion-dollar corporation with thousands of communications professionals, with dedicated social media teams across every platform, with direct lines to every major technology publication on Earth, watched a fabricated report about their flagship product spread unchecked and chose silence. That silence was a choice. And it tells you something important about how Microsoft views its relationship with its users. Because when a company genuinely cares about its customers, when it values the trust relationship, when it treats its users as partners rather than revenue sources, it does not sit silently while false information about its products spreads globally. It responds, it clarifies, it protects the trust that it has spent years building. Microsoft did not respond because Microsoft does not have trust to protect. They know it. Their internal teams know it. Their leadership knows it. The trust was spent years ago, incrementally, one forced update at a time, one embedded advertisement at a time, one eliminated workaround at a time. And when you have no trust left to protect, silence costs you nothing, because you cannot lose what you have already given away. Compare that to how the Linux community operates. When a security vulnerability is discovered in a major distribution, the response is immediate, public, and transparent. The vulnerability is documented openly. The patch is developed publicly. The timeline is communicated honestly. Users are given complete information and complete control over how and when they apply the fix. Nobody hides. Nobody stays silent. Nobody waits for the problem to resolve itself through third-party intervention. The community responds because the community is accountable to its users, not to shareholders, not to quarterly earnings calls, not to advertising partners. The difference in accountability is the difference between an operating system that serves you and an operating system that serves itself. And it is the reason why, despite decades of institutional momentum, despite billions of dollars in marketing, despite the deepest enterprise integration in the history of computing, Microsoft is watching its most technically capable users walk toward the exit. Not running, walking, calmly, deliberately, with their old laptops under their arms and a Linux USB drive in their pockets, walking toward an operating system that will never lie to them, never spy on them, never lock them out of their own machines, and never stay silent when they deserve answers. The February 2026 Steam hardware survey showed Windows 11 losing 10% of its user share, while Windows 10 gained 12%. People would rather run an unpatched, unsupported operating system than continue using what Microsoft has turned Windows 11 into. And the people who are done tolerating both options entirely, the people who are ready for something genuinely different, are finding Linux waiting with exactly the same proposition it has offered for 30 years. Your computer, your rules, no conditions, no exceptions. Bill Gates once said that Linux was a threat to intellectual property. He was wrong about the threat. Linux was never a threat to intellectual property. Linux is a threat to the business model that treats users as intellectual property. The business model that harvests your data, monetizes your attention, and sells your behavioral patterns to advertisers while calling it user experience enhancement. Linux is a threat to that model because Linux proves it is unnecessary. You can build a world-class operating system without any of it, without the telemetry, without the advertising, without the mandatory accounts, without the forced updates, without the artificial hardware requirements. You can build something that simply works, that belongs to the user, and that improves because the people building it want it to be better, not because a revenue target demands it. That proof of concept, running on millions of desktops, powering government infrastructure across multiple nations, dominating the server market, controlling every supercomputer on Earth, and now making genuine inroads into the one market Microsoft always believed was untouchable, is the real story of 2026. Microsoft got caught in a lie about Windows 12. Linux just kept telling the truth. And every day, more people are listening,